we've actually done some mic demos on your voice when we were starting, I think towards either the tail end of the Mozzie Bray record into the TVC record. I used a Telefunken. I used this really weird, I believe it's called like an Altec. They call it a salt shaker. Okay. And actually on our track, Green Curry.
Never stop, I don't settle, I go hard. I'm the GOAT at the top. Yo, I'm high above the charts, boy. I don't sweat, boy, I'm blessed. Feel the breeze, find me chilling on the beach. Boy, I do this in my sleep, yeah.
I'm using a blend of all of those microphones, and I started at the beginning with this like, I don't know if this is the right word, like triage of microphones, but that was cool because I got to shape how I want your voice to sound with all those microphones. But there's this like philosophy that I've heard Daniel Lenoir talk about, which is like the print of an artist. He'll say some singers, like they have a great microphone print, meaning when their voice comes out, it captures really well. And by the end of the record, I felt like that print was printing onto just the SM7 what we were using the multiple microphones for. And I think that's because the SM7 for me is like the base level microphone, where I like for the co-writers that I work with, the singers, rappers, to feel like they can do anything with an SM7. Okay. And I like it because it doesn't overhype your voice and it doesn't like leave you wanting too much more. So I think it's a good in-between balance of like, it's not gonna make you sound magical, but it's also not going to hurt you. So it forces you in a way to develop your own relationship with the mic. And then once you have that relationship, all I have to do is hand it to you. You could hold it in your hand. You could have it on a stand. It works great in a non-treated room. Like just if you're in a home setting, it works great. And it takes... The real reason why a lot of people love it is because it's a dynamic microphone, so it takes to aggressive dynamic vocals really well. So if you're, really giving it a lot of volume, it receives it really well. Hello and welcome to Mothership Gear. This is an episode that I'm really excited about because we're going to be talking about how we recorded Cam's vocals on some new music that's coming up. So if you're curious how to record rap vocals with an SM7, you're watching the right video. So Cam, go ahead and take it away. Like we'll start the discussion with you. Like, what are your questions as the artist for the engineer?
Okay, yeah. So I mean, if I hear you right, then it sounds like the SM7 is almost kind of like a blank canvas.
Yes.
That allows the artist to be able to bring what they bring vocally to a track or to whatever they're trying to put on it, and it's not necessarily corrupting it, for lack of a better term, where like it might make them sound magical where they don't. Yeah. This allows somebody, I mean, for lack of a better term, it allows them to develop, to figure out their own style, so that they can bring what they bring to a mic in general.
Yes, totally. It's like, it's the fundamentals to me. Okay. It's like, yeah, like we always talk about basketball. It's like learning the fundamentals of a great pass or like a great, like making sure you could handle the ball with both hands. Yeah. It's like, that's how I feel about the SM7. It's the most common microphone today, in my opinion. Yeah. So if you're great with an SM7, you could go to your friend's house and write together for the first time, track vocals and send that to a mixing engineer. And if you have good SM7 technique, then you're going to be able to work with anyone. But if you're the guy who's like, I need a $4,000 microphone to sound good, to sound like me, it's like, it's great that you have that resource, but your friends might not have that. You might not be able to carry that on the road with you. You might not be able to travel with that. And that's going to take more maintenance. So use that $4,000 microphone on your album when you have plenty of time to track, but also figure out how you sound with an SM7, because I've recorded a ton of podcasts with it, a ton of vocals, live stuff, and as an engineer, it's always fun to hear what a singer sounds like when they're singing through the SM7, because they bring their own tonal frequency, and because I know this mic great, it's like, oh wow, that's what Tom Ellis, who's Lucifer, sounds like talking through it. This is what, you know, Joe Buck, who's a sports guy, like this is what he sounds like through the SM7. So for me, it's like my little buddy, and it's like going around, it's like a camera that you know and love. It's like capturing all these different types of voices and being like, wow, like Cameron's voice is so rich in the upper register, but he also has a nice low end, and he's doing that. Like, it's like I can give more credit to the artist, and like I said, if I have time to try different stuff, I will. But I love knowing we have a great record with just the SM7 if we need it, because the more we write, by the end of the record, we run out of time.
That's
like,
true.
Dude, we got to crank out these songs. And it's like, if I had to set up a really nice tube mic and all this different stuff just for us to get a good sound, that would bum me out. So I start with the more complicated setup, and then I love to end with just an SM7.
That's
you know,
awesome.
so it to me it rallies us around the fundamentals, basically.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. It sounds like it almost like reveals the true essence of an artist, especially if a good engineer is familiar with what it's doing. So you can show what somebody's good at and what they're not with using that type of mic. And speaking of the SM7, what else do you run vocals through with the SM7, especially like when you're working with me?
Yeah, so with you, we use a Vintech 473, which is just like an affordable piece of equipment if you're looking for one more thing to add to your chain. So it's like you have the microphone, you could go straight into your Sapphire or your Apollo or whatever it is that you're using as your interface. But before we hit the interface, we have like this analog piece of gear with like a transformer in it that allows me to get what like engineers call like saturation or warmth or grit. And so I could kind of, depending on the song, decide how hard I want to drive your vocal. And because you could create this like natural distortion with your voice, I'll usually go pretty clean, like as clean as I can, because I don't want to create this false distortion or this false saturation already on a voice that already has so much texture. So occasionally, if it's like a softer song or you're singing, I'll like boost some EQ, like give it some top presence so you can hear yourself better as you're singing, but also to create a similar level of confidence with your singing as with your rapping. Because when we started, I don't think you thought I was going to have you singing as much as you do.
Not at all. Yeah. I was like, I came here to spit bars. That's
it. So like every once in a while, I'll be like, we don't have the hook, and I'm going to sing you something. See if you could sing this back, and it's going to take on its own life form when you sing it. And it's going to be way more interesting to me because I like the sound of your voice. And we've realized like you kind of sound like Kid Cudi when you sing. And you also kind of have this like rock voice too.
That came out when we were working together. That was fun, man.
So the SM7 to me, like it's perfect for capturing either or, like cleaner rap vocals where you just want precision, but also where you want to like juice up a singing vocal to have that same type of aggression. It's like I can use the preamp to get some of that aggression with your singing voice.
Oh, okay. That's really awesome. So, I mean, like explain for a budding producer like myself, explain a little bit, like you said some things like distortion. There were a few other things that you had mentioned that running this vocal chain through, like what it does. Can you just explain those a little bit more? So like
saturation, that is, you know, I'm sure this happens in other forms of tech, but in the music world, it especially does, where we have digital computers now, and back in the day they had tape machines, they had preamps, like it's like a classic car. It's like going from a classic sports car in the 60s to a Tesla. And there's a lot of the feel of the analog equipment that engineers want to feel when they're what's called in the box working in the computer. So for me, I'm emulating what a tape machine would do. I'm emulating what transformers, what tubes would do. And so I use saturation and those things to create that familiar sound. Like if you listen to a Mos Def record, it's like you're hearing saturation. If you're listening to old Gorillaz, because like they could have been using tape, they could have been in a studio with tubes, and like I always think it would be hot to be in that room because you have all this gear running, tubes, transistors, like the electricity in the room is contributing to the sound. And so the nice thing about computers is like we don't have all this gear running, but I still got to emulate that so it feels like music. Like it sounds like what we've grown up listening to. And you know, you and I love old school like rap and like 90s rap and early 2000s. And so it's like I don't want our stuff to come across as less soulful because we're doing it all digitally.
Yeah.
So I use the saturation and the tape stuff to make it sound like a record.
That's cool. So, I mean, it sounds like there was a lot that went into how vocals sounded when like hip hop was coming up, or when there was the conscious rap and all of that, or I mean, just gangster rap and all that in general. There was a lot that was happening in the studio.
Yeah.
And when you move over to a digital, there's a lot that you might lose from that. And I would say even might have been unintentional, but these things that you're now running this vocal chain through allows to sort of bring that back a little bit and say like something as simple as you were saying, the electricity in the room at the same time that you were doing the vocals gives it that more vintage feel by being able to do that. Am I hearing that right?
Because you want to trust the record. Like you want to listen to it and not feel like, ooh, that sounds a little homemade. You know, like so all these tools help you and me go from listening to like a record that we like by somebody else and then to our own record and be like, oh, it holds up. Like it translates. It sounds like we made something for the masses. You know, like it's a product that's ready to go out, and all those little tips and tricks take it from a home recording to something that sounds like presentable for bigger audiences. That's
awesome. No, I mean, that's really cool that even like the fine details of something like that can now be put into the track. And the fact that people didn't miss that, I'm sure that it would have been easy to just say, oh, we've got something digital. It's easier. It doesn't have the electric sound right now. But there was something I'm sure really charming about that. And the fact that people thought that should be preserved, I think is really, really important. Let's talk a little bit about mixing, especially when it comes to the mixing my vocals and mixing rappers in general. How do you find yourself mixing my vocals different than some of the other artists that you typically work with?
Yeah, with you, like I like to do stuff what's called in parallel, which is like you take one channel and then you send a copy of your voice to another and you put some effects on this one and you blend those two together.
Okay.
Blend those two things because your voice has so much rich texture. I like to support it and make sure that it lives in the world of the music and not just sound like it's coming from its own space.
Okay.
But I also don't want to over process it to where I'm diminishing your natural texture. So I'll run stuff in parallel. I'll add some distortion. I'll add some echo. I'll add some reverb, but those are tucked in way lower than other vocalists that I work with because your voice is so rich.
Okay.
I don't want to diminish the natural vibe that's already there in place of a more synthetic vibe.
Okay.
So it's just being a lot more subtle, really.
Okay.
And then when you sing, I like for it to sound like very futuristic. And like you and I, we love cyberpunk, we love sci-fi.
Yep.
I want this record to sound new and old. And so when you sing, I go for more of the newer techniques of like, we're gonna like use Melodyne to alter the voice in different ways that then when it comes out, it sounds a little bit more robotic, or it sounds like it's another character in our heads that's now speaking to us. You know, it's like we're summoning these other characters using the more like modern techniques. And so like sometimes when I need a vocal to cut through better, I'll just run it through Melodyne and not really do much to it, but I'll notice that extra processing adds a little bit of that like weird vibe where you're like, what is that? Like how are they getting his voice like that? It's like I'll use something like Melodyne, or I'll use the effects in a more exaggerated way to separate the sections. Like here's the verse, there's not much on your vocal, and then here's the chorus. We're like using Melodyne in a weird way. We're using like what's called an eventide harmonizer in a weird way. We're using all these weird tools so that way we're carrying you beat to beat, section to section, and there's a little bit of that like dynamic change that we'd want.
I love that, sort of mixing the old with the new.
Right.
And even the idea of just like having a copy of my voice below the natural voice and sort of doing some things to it just to give it a little bit more kick to me, but also centering my voice. That sounds like a really fun process. And sounds like, how long is it taking you to come up with that to consistently do?
Like, I mean, how really, like every singer's different. So you and I probably worked on this record for like 8 months. So over those 8 months, I'm learning these tricks about your voice specifically.
Yeah.
I use a lot of the same tools, but how I use them is different depending on the vocalist.
That makes sense. This may be something new because, again, like I said, I'm a budding producer. What's your approach to how you EQ my voice? Because I know when you're making a beat or when you're making music, you want it to be sort of an orchestra, right? Some places some instruments are going to be in different frequencies to balance everything out. I know that you probably take a song by song approach with using my voice, but what's the typical thought process in EQing my voice?
Yeah, it's a feel thing for me. It's hard to explain. Once the EQ's in front of me, I just kind of start doing things.
Okay.
So I'll always explore, like, what does it look like if we add more top end to your voice? What does it look like if we scoop out the middle? And what does it look like if we maybe cut like the extreme low frequencies and then maybe boost some of the middle some of the, like, the more natural vocal low end stuff. So I think about, like, what is the music doing first?
Of course.
And then where do we want you to fit into that music? So for instance, if it's less going on musically, I'll boost the lows, I'll boost the highs, so that way you feel like the narrator.
Yeah.
But if there's a lot going on, I think, what does this sound like if this was a song coming on the radio as you're driving? We don't need as much low end in the voice. We don't need as much top end because we have guitars, we have bass with distortion, we have a really loud kick drum, a really loud snare, hi-hats. So I'll carve you into the mix to make sure that, like, you're sitting where we need you to sit, whether you're it's like a movie, you're the voiceover at the beginning, or it's like there's action, there's bullets flying, there's like superheroes doing magic, there's all this stuff, and you're a part of the orchestra, as you say. So it really just depends. But I always look at those things like, does this vocal need to have more presence and have top end clarity, or does this vocal need to just scoop out things that are not working, or does this vocal need an exaggerated low end? Those are the things that I most commonly look at.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense, and playing off what's going on with the music only makes sense. You never want them to clash. What's the most difficult part when it comes to mixing my vocals and such?
When we're working really quickly and there's magic and I got to capture it and then deal with it later. It's like, oh shoot, Cam was a little further from the mic than normal, or like,
a little sick today.
Yeah, Cam was a little sick, or those are always the most challenging, because you're never working in a perfect scenario. You're working to make the artist feel comfortable and to make sure that you're getting the best lyrics you can in the time that we have, and you're getting the best performance you can. And then I take a backseat, and then I live with the track for months, carving out space, creating guitar lines that are reacting to that performance. Because now the performance is static and it's living in the computer. So like now I need to bring that to life, because you did your part. It's like you acted out the scene. Now I'm in the editing room, like getting the best out of those performances that we have.
Yeah, and I've seen that over and over again, because it's a process. We go back and forth when we're doing these records, where I'll listen to a song one day and then I'll listen to it again the next day, and I'm like, oh, this popped a lot more, or this sort of pulled back to help to help the lyrics stand out a little bit. And it's just always been a cool experience to see where a song starts and where it ends up after you've mixed it and have been able to think about what you want to do with different lyrics or different performances during the time.
Totally. Well, thank you guys for watching our video on our process of the SM7. We're using it right now. So I'll be mixing this in Adobe Premiere. So
it's a cool
it's a
time.
totally different episode, different process of podcast mixing. But this is super fun, Cam. Thanks for chatting, nerding out about my favorite microphone.
Thanks for having me.
See you guys later.
Yeah.